ecologist Garrett Hardin's Tragedy of the Commons has proven a useful concept for understanding how we have come to be at the brink of numerous environmental catastrophes. People face a dangerous situation created not by malicious outside forces, but by the apparently appropriate and innocent behaviors of many individuals acting alone. Hardin's parable involves a pasture open to all. He asks us to imagine the grazing of animals on a common ground. Individuals are motivated to add their flocks to increase personal wealth. Yet every animal added to the total degrades the common by a small amount. Although the degradation for each additional animal is small relative to the gain in wealth for each owner, if all owners follow this pattern, the commons will ultimately be destroyed. And, being rational actors, each owner adds to their flock. Therein is the tragedy. Each man is locked into a system that compels him to increase his herd without limit, in a world that is limited. Ruin is the destination toward which all men rush, each pursuing his own interest in a society that believes in the freedom of the commons. Despite its reception as revolutionary, Hardin's tragedy was not a new concept. Its intellectual roots trace back to Aristotle, who noted that what is in common to the greatest number has the least care bestowed upon it, as well as to Hobbes and his Leviathan. More recently, William Forster Lloyd identified in 1833 the problems resulting from property owned in common. Yet if all that was at stake here was grazing land in the 1800s, this would be an issue for historians alone. Hardin immediately recognized that this concept applies in its broader sense to a great many modern environmental problems. Simply stated, we face a serious dilemma, an instance where individual rational behavior can cause long-term harm to the environment, others, and ultimately oneself. This isn't just theory. I'm sure some of you have seen those pictures from outer space over the Congo where privately held land bumps up against common land. The private land is much nicer and is greener and more full. This has to do with incentives. The man who has his own land has a good reason to maintain it and not to overgraze. He won't overload the field because he pays the entire price of its degradation and therefore will not do it. On common land, the price is more diffuse and the gains are concentrated. Therefore, each rancher has close to nothing to gain from conserving the resource, and so he doesn't. And none of the ranchers conserve, and then the field becomes degraded and the resource destroyed. Completely unregulated land will result in a tragedy of the commons, and this is why land is regulated. When a factory dumps into a river, that factory pays a very small price for doing so, but the entire river pays as well. The cost for dumping may actually be higher than the benefit to the factory, but the factory is only paying a tiny portion of that cost, and therefore unregulated will dump. This is why industries must be regulated, and the regulation can come in the form of a law or a private boycott, but laws are typically more effective. But to take it to another level, there could also be a global tragedy of the commons in relation to greenhouse gases. Each country has relatively little to gain by limiting emissions, but if every country increases greenhouse gas emissions at the current rate, the effect could be catastrophic. And before someone posts a comment that says something like this, let me tell you that people who believe in anthropogenic global warming are not claiming that man is producing massive amounts of greenhouse gases, just that they are producing a fractional amount more, which drives climate change. The fact that water vapor is indeed the most powerful greenhouse gas is meaningless if man's pissant contribution can actually drive climate change. But a tragedy of the commons can be used to justify regulation, because left to its own devices, a competitive market will overuse whatever resources it uses, because each company has little to gain by conserving. And as our economies become larger, expect this peculiar form of market failure to become more and more common. And this can also apply to immigration.
Now that you are ready for your second lesson, let us look back and see what were the most important things you have learned from your first lesson. second lesson.